Welcome to another edition of Talk City Greensboro, produced by GTN, featuring interviews and events happening around town. It's an easy way to stay in the know while you're on the go. Subscribe to Talk City on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you can keep up with what's going on in Greensboro City government. I'm your host, Josh Johnson, and alongside me, as always, my good friend, the man at the controls, Mr. Devin Smith. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself, Josh?
Very well, thank you.
Oh, that's always good. That's always good. So one of the jewels in our community and the city's organization is the Greensboro History Museum. Well, 2020 was definitely a struggle nationwide. We saw that all over the nation, but the statement it hit close to home was literal right here in our community as protesters marched through downtown, and some people outside of those peaceful protests vandalized some properties, and then we saw some of those murals and things going up. Well, the History Museum documented some of the things that were happening in Greensboro over the past year, and they decided to do an exhibit called Pieces of Now. And here to talk to us more about this exhibit, he was here to introduce it a couple months ago, but now to really get into it after it's been placed in the museum is the curator of education for the Greensboro History Museum, Mr. Rodney Dawson. How you doing?
Doing all right. Thank you, Devin. Thank you, Joshua. Appreciate you having me over here again.
Always good to see you. Rodney's in and out of here a lot, which is a good thing. We like having him here.
Absolutely. Well, the exhibit is really documentation of what we've been calling a historic year last year, from a global pandemic to the nationwide protests for social injustice, especially after the killing of George Floyd. And then Greensboro really embodied that moment during the summer. So now that you've put up Pieces of Now and it's been open to the public for some months, how has that been taken in by the community?
From my perspective, it's all been good, but I don't think that's the case. I just think that folks that didn't like it haven't said anything or haven't been there, which we do want them to come. But those that have come and made their expressions, we've done it in two ways, just kind of informal interviews, just people just stopping you and making their comments, and then observations. And then we also have some, I guess you call it anecdotal, but as you walk through the exhibit, you can fill out, at the end, you can fill out a little sticky note and put it on the wall and give your thoughts. And on that, it's been a few. But we didn't want to shy away from folks that didn't like it. We wanted them to come and say, tell us what you didn't like, because that's your piece. But folks have been very appreciative of it. And I would say that the biggest word I've gotten is we want more. There's more that can be told, which we knew. For instance, when the mayor, Nancy Vaughn, came through, she thought it was a good exhibit, and she made the comment, it's a great exhibit, but you're missing something. And we said, what? And she mentioned the name of A.J. Morgan, who was instrumental in conducting the protest that kind of stopped the businesses. He shut down I-40. And, the I forget what you call it, the mall area on Wendover with Kohl's and all that. But I want to ask him, how do you shut down the highway? Who's the first guy that walks out there? But we did a podcast with him, and he, told us how he did that. But the mayor was able to come through and say, you're missing this. And so we've had other people come through and say, hey, you should add that, or go talk to this person, or different communities that need to be represented. So, and folks have also said more people need to see it. And not just see it, but see it to get lessons from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's amazing.
It's an experience. You do more than see it.
You feel it when you walk in the room, definitely.
Yeah. So we're going to be releasing this podcast on a pretty important day in Greensboro, February 1st. Can you talk about the ties to what happened here last year? To the sit-ins, which had a great impact on the civil rights movement?
That's a good question. Let's see. How can we tie this in? Well, I think what happened with the A&T4 is that people were feeling as if their voices were not being heard, and so they were finding ways to make their voices heard. And they said, if we can make someone uncomfortable or make it inconvenient, then maybe they'll listen to me now. And I think that, in large part, is what happened with the ANT4. With the help of others, they decided we're going to make something uncomfortable. We're going to go against the rules a little bit and bring some attention and put a spotlight on what's going on. And that, in turn, galvanized others because they couldn't look away.
Yeah.
They had to say, okay, the nation's looking at us now. We need to respond. The death of George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd, was another moment where people could not look away. And you couldn't scapegoat it. You couldn't deny it. Right. And, you had to face it. Now, whether or not you address it, that's yet to be determined. But you had to face it. And so I think Pieces of Now, in some ways, is facing the disparities and the injustices that we feel and see here in Greensboro.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've done a lot more than just setting up this exhibit. It's not like you just go in and you walk through an exhibit, you see the murals. There's been a lot more going on with the connection to this. And so you've went out, you've done interviews with some of the photographers that have pieces there, some of the artists that painted murals that protected the businesses. It's been a lot more than just the artwork itself. So why was that so important to add those pieces to the exhibit?
A good question, because typically when you have, and I'm still new to the museum business, but my director told me I'm a designer now. She said I'm officially a designer. So typically what happens is if you take an exhibit that will come through, you know the beginning and you know the end. And so from a curator's perspective, they're going to put a museum lens on it, and they're going to tell the story from a museum perspective.
Right.
With this, it's what you call history happening now. And so we did not want a museum lens on it. We wanted it to be curated by the community. That's why we said opposing voices, have your piece, speak. Voices that are in favor, have your piece, speak. We just want to be a table where you come. And so how can you do that? Well, you got to hear from them. So we wanted to, and bit by bit, people are telling us you need to hear from more. So it's still not complete. But we talked to business owners, right? And then they led us to artists that they knew within their community. Then we ended up speaking with protest organizers who had, a lot of them happen to be artists. And so they started giving us their perspective. And then I started thinking, what would it be like the killing of an African-American man in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the hands of the police? And then lo and behold, in Greensboro, our sheriff and our city police chief are both African-American males. And so I said, what would it be like to talk to someone that you approach your job from that perspective? And so I thought it important to talk to Chief James. And so we interviewed him, and he gave us some great insight. We did a podcast with Sheriff Rogers. And then we wanted to hear from our LGBTQ community. So I got a podcast that's not released yet with someone that's not representing the entire community, but from their perspective, why it was important for them to be out there. And so we just talked to different people from different angles, and we wanted to hear different voices. So it wouldn't be, oh, that's a museum thing. It's more of, one of the greatest things I heard is when the one of the protesters groups that kind of led the thing, they did the introductory mural. It's called House of Wax. But they did the introductory mural to Pieces of Now, which you've seen. But when they came in, they started in its beginning stages as Robert, our designer, was developing it. But when they came in after Robert had gotten most of the stuff in place, you could see them choking up. Yeah. They were like, man, this took me back. I feel like I'm back there again.
Well, so for me, I didn't participate in any of the protests or anything like that from the standpoint. Well, at the time we were in a global pandemic, things like that. My wife's pregnant. I stayed home. Right. That was a personal decision that I made.
Oh, you would have had a protest at your house.
Exactly. Sometimes coming to work and going home, we have to have that discussion about where do we draw the line. And so for me, it's working home. That's it, right? So when I walked in, I felt like I was there.
Okay, good.
And it felt. It was almost one of, like, I've been to the Civil Rights, the museum dozens of times. I'm an A&T graduate. I hear the stories. I've heard it for a decade now, right? But walking into that place, I had to hold back tears. I had to hold back emotions and things like that, just because it felt different, because it was happening. It wasn't history in the perspective of that happened decades ago.
Yeah.
I mean, they talk about, what did they fight for back then in the civil rights movement, but it's like they're fighting for this right now.
Yeah. And Glenn Perkins, our his community historian outreach, he has so many titles. He deals with outreach.
Yeah.
But he came up with that title, but it's Pieces of Now.
Yeah.
So that's good that you said that. That means it's hitting you, stuff that's happening right now. How do you feel now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's completely different to experience it that way. That's why it's important for people to go, because that museum experience is the same for so many people, where they go in and it's something that happened, years ago, and this just happened.
Yeah.
Still happening.
Still happening.
Yeah, it's less of an educational, for me, it was less from an educational standpoint in the sense that you go to a museum and it's like, well, this happened in 1995.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that, right? It's like, this was like, wow.
Yeah.
You get a chance to experience what was actually going on, even though you lived it. But if you weren't there in that moment, you can still feel like you were there when you walk into that exhibit.
And that's a tribute to the people that contributed to it, because it wasn't that museum education. I'm here to teach you. Don't touch this.
Yeah.
But in 1927, this happened.
All right.
Yeah.
And with COVID, we couldn't do it. We couldn't have it where if it was not COVID, you probably had a bunch of interactives where you can touch this. And, but we couldn't, so it had to be something where we had to kind of rush you through. But you could get an experience that will then maybe lead you to our website, greensborohistory.org, and then you can get more of it. But there's a gentleman named Rasheem Pugh who came here from New Jersey, who started the Save the Arts Foundation, and he was doing some videography work for me. And so I visited his studio and seen his art, and come to find out, Rasheem's a 5-time Grammy Award winner.
Wow.
He's written scores for Fast and Furious and Rush Hour.
Nice.
And he's co-wrote Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, in which he won his 5 Grammys.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so I said, hey, Rasheem, we were having a meeting, and I think it was Robert or somebody said, man, we're missing kind of a hip-hop, poetic kind of feel to it. And I said, well, let me reach out to Rasheem. This is meeting's on a Wednesday night, I don't know, Tuesday or something. Or I contact Rasheem on a Thursday, and he says, okay, let me get with my partner, Nikisha Wrights. And by Friday, he sent me this video, We Are Human, that he produced. And it was so impactful that Robert, our exhibit designer, then took the lyrics to the poem, and it's displayed throughout the exhibit on the walls.
Yeah.
And the reason you have those, those pictures you see that kind of in a circle
and
shape
around,
and things that are hanging, is to give you that feel that things are swirling, which is what COVID is. Things are just swirling in the air. All this stuff is just happening. And then as you go through, you see the lyrics, We Are Human. And, it starts with that poem. But that was her contribution.
Yeah.
And we're looking for more, too. And we've since had Brandon Green. The teachers are the biggest thing. I'm a former teacher, so I'm really very proud of the teachers' contribution. Not only were they some of the lead organizers, most of the photos you see were taken by a teacher who's a photographer on the side.
Man, the photos, dude.
Yeah, that's Kevin Green.
Yeah.
That's Kevin Green.
Also an A&T graduate.
A&T grad. And but then no relation, Brandon Green. You walked in and you saw that video. As soon as you walk in, to the right,
Yeah.
that's his undergrad is in music production or something dealing with production.
Yeah.
But you saw the video he put together in response to the demonstrations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us your favorite part of Pieces of Now and why. I know you got to pick one.
Well, I would say outside of the interviews that were done, I would say it's it's 2 parts. When you walk in, you see the mural of I forget the name of it, but the mural of the black gentleman with the dreads holding the young white girl's hand.
Yep.
And that is young Emery, 4 years old, and the gentleman is Pastor Michael Harris with the vest on. I asked him, why do you wear the vest? Reminds me of my Army days. I'm prior service, used to be in the Army, so we hit it off right away. But he still wanted to show his love for country, so he wore that vest that day. But he wanted to highlight there's some things going wrong. Emery's father asked the young Emery and her brother, who's a little older, and said, "You want to go learn about a protest?" They said, "Great." He said, "Well, stick close to me because it's COVID-19. When they get out there, she says, "I want to learn to protest." She lets go of his hand and runs. And without any inhibitions or hesitations, she sees this black gentleman and she extends her hand. And he, in the same way, grabs her hand. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a depiction of how you like things to be.
Yeah.
I'm not saying go grab strangers' hands, but
Yeah.
it was an instance there. Kevin Green, the teacher, who's an educator by trade, happens to be there to take that picture. It goes viral.
Yep.
And then the muralist, who's a graphic artist, says, "I want to paint something, but that's the only thing I want to paint." Mm-hmm. And he paints that picture.
Yeah.
And so I think that encapsulates pieces of now. You're there for disparities, you're there for injustice, but while you're there, you see people who don't look like each other coming together.
Yeah.
And I think, go back to the sit-in movements, you go back to the movement in 1961, 63, whatever. It's just trying to get people to come together.
Absolutely.
Yep. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would encourage anybody and everybody that can come see it to come see it. I've had I took some pictures while we were there the last time, and posted them to my social media, and I've had people from all over ask me about it.
Yeah,
and so how can they see it if they're not able to physically come? Are they able to participate online?
Well, we do have, I don't know if it's up yet. I know Glenn is working on it, but just recently we got a 3D capturing of the exhibit.
Okay.
And so it's a 3D virtual tour. Mm-hmm. So
Cool.
You've seen, I tell people, if you've ever been on a real estate website and you want to walk through a house,
Yep.
it's the same thing. And the kicker is all those monitors that you see with videos on them, as you walk through the exhibit, you'll see the monitor. You can click on the monitor and it'll play the video.
Okay.
And so it's just like you're being there. I didn't check, but it might be up now. It may be up by the time this airs. But we were just working on getting through any technical issues, trying to put it up as soon as possible.
And where is that at?
That'll be at greensborohistory.org. And then you'll see a link for tours, or you might see a subheading for the virtual Pieces of Now, and you can click on that.
Absolutely.
And take the virtual tour.
And you can shamelessly plug your podcast as well.
Oh, do a History Notes podcast, which you all are going to be on a guest on soon. But also wanted to highlight that working on 2 documentaries.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
One is called 450 and Change, which I told you about. It's Dr. Simpkins and the Greensboro Six. They all paid 75 cents a piece to play in December 7, 1955. And the case ended up going to the Supreme Court when they were denied an ability to play. That 75 cents each equaled 450, and led to all this change. And so that's a documentary where we've interviewed several people throughout the city, including former Mayor Jim Melvin, whom this building we're in is named after, the current mayor, the Justice Henry Fry, Shirley Fry, you name it. And then also from Pieces of Now, was able to contact some folks and said, let's do, through an interview, a friend of mine, Dr. Lucas, said, you need to talk about the women behind the sit-in movement.
Yeah.
And I just recently did an interview with Jesse Jackson about his time here in Greensboro. And he said, before I could even ask him, he said the Bennett Bells were the sustaining force behind the movement. So I said, I got to do a documentary on that. So that one's called Hidden Heroes.
Yeah.
So look for that to come out soon. But for 450 and Change, 450andchange.com. Same thing on Instagram, just 450 and Change.
Gotcha. Which you talk about the Bennett Bells. This is a side note. We're going off the rails. We're going to end the podcast soon. But it was said that they were actually the ones who were going to do the sit-in. It wasn't going to just start with those 4 young men. That it was actually going to be a group of college students to go. They wanted to wait until after, I think it was maybe it was spring break or something like that. They wanted to wait until after break because they didn't know how it was going to happen, how they would sustain it if they went when they did. But the 4 young men was like, no, we have to do it right now. And so they went, and then that's why it seemed like, oh, it just happened so smoothly. Like they went, and then the next day everybody came. Well, that was because everybody was already on board with it.
Right.
So people have said we'll have to talk to everybody else.
That could be another podcast because I've read that too. But I mentioned Dr. George Simpkins. He was originally approached to do the sit-in.
Really?
Yeah.
However, he was already tied up in court with the Gillespie Park case that went to the Supreme Court. He was like, man, I got enough lawyers.
Yeah. So I mean, this has been great. If you want to see it, how long? Right now, it's projected to be up at least until the summer.
Well, we said 6 months from September, so do the math. That would say March. But don't hold me to that.
Yeah.
And then we'll live online, definitely. Mm-hmm. But I would say, once you listen to this podcast, just find a reason to come down there. We're Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 5.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Go see it, man. It's powerful.
It really is. I encourage everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really go see this. Rodney, thanks, man. We appreciate
thank
you
all.
being here.
Appreciate you all.
Stay tuned in weekly by subscribing to Talk City Greensboro on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. And don't forget, you can download Talk City from SoundCloud.
That's it for this week. Thank you for tuning in to Talk City. Be sure to watch GTN, your official source for news and information about the city of Greensboro. GTN is available on Spectrum Channel 13,
AT&T UVerse Channel 99,
and North State Channel 31.
GTN also streams live on Roku and the city's website at
Greensboro-nc.gov. Have a good one.
Take care.